Welcome back to The Great Indoors. Before we dive into today's interview, I want to tell you about our next season, which will be recorded live at MWC Barcelona from February the 26th to the 29th. You'll hear from industry experts, explore new innovations, and gain new insight into the world of connectivity. New episodes coming early March, wherever you get your podcasts.
Taking action to protect our environment will help to keep our Canadian economy strong and growing. In a circular economy, products are made to last longer, communities share resources and save money, and businesses are maintaining, reusing, manufacturing, and recycling materials to create more value for you and future generations. For example, in Canada, if we improve how we manage plastic waste through the circular economy, by 2030 we can reduce 1.8 million tons of carbon pollution, generate billions of dollars in revenue, and create approximately 42,000 jobs. So if you repair your things instead of throwing them out, use sharing services like tool lending, libraries, or car sharing services, or simply repurpose some of your old belongings, like turning old pallets into new bookshelves, you are participating in the circular economy. And if you're not yet taking any of these actions, now is your chance to learn more about how you, your business, and your community can contribute to the transition toward a more circular economy. The circular economy. More value, less waste.
Now, what you just heard there was the actual video on the Canadian government website that defines the circular economy. Though we haven't just answered our question for today in the intro, we're going to talk about how the circular economy applies to something that our industry is very much responsible for, and that's e-waste. Now, e-waste, of course, refers to discarded, recycled, or refurbished electrical and electronic products. As such, every company in this industry must now consider this as part of their ESG efforts moving forward. Welcome to The Great Indoors, a podcast where we look at the technological implications brought about by the next industrial revolution and how this could potentially help solve the biggest problems facing humanity. I'm your host, Matt Roberts, and joining me as ever is my trusty co-pilot and producer, Larissa Yee. Now, a reminder for all of you in this historic 7th season, in that we have episodes that focus in two areas. One, on Canada specifically, and also interviews we recorded at MWC Las Vegas just a couple of months ago. It was our 3rd year as the GSMA's official podcast for MWC Las Vegas. But today, we're back in Canada, and our guest is Stephanie McClarty. Now, I happened to meet Stephanie by chance at the Canadian Telecoms Summit in Toronto just 2 weeks ago. She was appearing on stage at the event to talk about sustainability in the telecom space as it pertains to Canada. Not only was I struck by her incredible work as the head of sustainability at Quantum Lifecycle Partners, but also I found out she was a fellow podcaster. And her infectious passion and enthusiasm for her podcast, The Circular Future, is incredible, and it focuses on the challenges of e-waste and its impact on the world. So of course, it was essential she joined The Great Indoors as a guest. Now, with the surge in ever more connected devices, e-waste in Canada alone has tripled in the past 20 years. Quantum Lifecycle Partners' mission is thus to try and alleviate the e-waste issue for the benefit of its customers and, of course, the environment. Now, Stephanie isn't just an incredible podcast host. She's a renowned entrepreneur known for her sustainable business initiatives. She founded Reficient in 2010, a marketplace offering sustainable solutions for telecom and AV companies, amongst other things, to manage surplus inventory. Now, in 2022, Reficient joined Quantum Lifecycle Partners with Stephanie as the head of sustainability. Now, she's an influential speaker, lecturer, and she addresses topics like eco-entrepreneurship, corporate social responsibility, and women in business. Her insights have been featured in national media, including the Globe and Mail and CBC. Actively engaged in her community, Stephanie is on the board of governors at McMaster University and chairs the IEC TC111 Canadian Committee on Environmental Electronic Standards. She holds degrees from McMaster University and the University of Innsbruck. So I'd like to welcome today's guest, Stephanie McClarty. So Stephanie, for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself, your bio, Quantum itself, and your role there.
Yeah, sure, Matt. I have most of my experience in the telecom industry, which is, of course, where we met. I started a company back in 2010 called Reficient, and we did reuse and recycling in the telecom space, as well as lots of sustainability reporting. And in January of last year, we were acquired by Quantum Lifecycle Partners. And Quantum is the largest electronics recycler and reuse provider in Canada. And so we have 9 locations across Canada and 1 location in Costa Rica, which everyone wants to work at and nobody can. But we basically handle anything with a battery or a plug. We look to reuse it first through remarketing or parts reuse. And if not, then we break it down through shredding and recycle it so the commodities can be reused again. So in my role as head of sustainability, I am in charge of sustainability strategy across our entire company and also doing a lot of work with our customers, doing education, thought leadership, hence why we started our podcasts, The Circular Future.
And so this is something that obviously you've been passionate about for a while, right? What was it that brought you to the world of sustainability and recycling?
Yeah, I have been always very environmentally focused. It's good to reuse and recycle because it's good for the environment, but it also helps you to save money or make money. I honestly did not expect to get into this. I actually have a master's in peace and conflict transformation, thinking I would work for the UN one day.
Oh, wow.
And it was
interesting.
In between semesters that I decided to get a job for a while and make some money because I had been traveling a lot prior to that. And the job I got was at one of the large telecom companies in Canada. And I, for 8 months, wore steel-toed boots and drove around a company van and went out to the old network sites and physically pulled out the old equipment, built some muscles as well.
Yeah.
But figured out what to do with it. Like, can it be reused? If so, by whom? How do we make those matches? And by the end of that contract, when I went back to school, I had this niche knowledge of telecom infrastructure equipment, like literally something I knew nothing about prior to starting. And I started consulting on the side, and that led into my business. And I've been in the space ever since.
No, but you jogged my memory there, and you said something really interesting, and it kind of ties in with a little bit with my career as well, because I started with a Canadian telecoms company called Nortel that was building and producing a lot of that hardware and infrastructure. And I remember some of the first assignments in the early 2000s I got sent on around the world, but you'd go into those switch rooms that were huge, great big facilities with these cabinets of equipment. And then within 10, 15 years, they'd shrunk down to the size of just a 17-inch rack of various devices and cables. So there was that miniaturization in telecoms hardware and infrastructure that's happened over the last 20 years. And therefore, these telecoms companies had all this surplus space and all this hardware that needed to be recycled, I guess. Was that your experience with it, seeing this next generation of hardware and software that brought everything down?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been these generational leaps in technology, and the big telecom companies could always afford the latest and the greatest. You know, for example, Nortel, when it was the latest and the greatest. But what we found was that there were smaller or small to medium-sized companies across Canada and internationally that wanted that, second generation technology, because for them, it was an upgrade and they couldn't afford the latest and greatest technology brand new anyways. So it was about making those matches. And every time there's been these leaps in technology, it's remained the same issue where for the large companies, it's a real hassle and it's not their core business. And so they would rather, in most cases, just let someone else deal with it and deal with it, responsibly and making sure it's going to the right place. And that's become ever more important.
So given all the efforts of quantum and the recycling, and we've just talked there about some of the history of why that recycling has come to be, what are the positive byproducts of the recycling effort? Obviously, it's the sustainability for the environment and the reuse of materials, but does it fit with Canada's and many other countries' overall plans to bridge the digital divide? Or some of those components can then be put in reuse to other people that have been deprived of the right hardware to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So what quantum essentially does is that we close the loop in terms of the circular economy. We know now that the linear economy, which is that take, make, waste model, we landfill things, it doesn't work. And there's lots of implications. So what we're doing is essentially closing that loop through reuse and recycling solutions. But an interesting sort of byproduct of that in terms of bridging the digital divide is we help to enable digital equity. And this whole concept of digital equity is something that we're now hearing from our customers because they're saying to us, yes, help us to recycle our cell phones and our modems and our computers and laptops, but help us do it in a way that also honors this digital equity piece, which is ensuring that we can not only keep reusing products and materials, but we're doing something good with it. One of the things that we offer now is a donation program where the technology that might be coming out of your company may or may not be a fit for a donation, but we can allocate a percentage of the resale proceeds or the recycling proceeds so that we can actually then redeploy the appropriate technology to nonprofits or to organizations, schools, that kind of thing that can actually reuse the technology. Because as we know, technology is a great enabler, but how do we get it into the hands of folks who may not have the budgets for the latest and the greatest, just like the large telecom companies?
You actively do that as part of quantum, right? So you're recycling things and then donating them to underprivileged children or communities elsewhere in Canada? Or is it just the resale proceeds that you donate?
Yeah. So we do get requests, and so we'll evaluate the requests as they come in, but it's an active program that we offer to our customers as well. We have a website called QNovum, which is essentially our own e-commerce store for refurbished technology. So it could be, giving gift cards for the QNovum website to go and, purchase the laptops that they need or the tablets and so forth.
Okay, awesome. Excellent. Yeah. And how do, your customer base, we talked about the big telcos, who else would those customers typically look like as far as they would come to you and say, we need to recycle or we need to go green? What would be the process on that? And who typically would your potential customers be?
Yeah, we work right across the board. So we work with the big banks. We work with retailers and large, publicly traded retailers. We work with, companies of various sizes, like large accounting firms to, small businesses. A lot of our business focuses on what we call the enterprise clients, the larger companies that cycle through their technology every 2 to 3 years and have that ongoing need, and also have that interest as well in the whole sustainability piece around it. And we offer sustainability reporting to those customers so that they have the data and also the mini case studies that they can then use and put in their impact report or share in their marketing. It's interesting because we now say that while most of our business is in the type of technology that we all deal with every day, our computers and our phones, what we're now seeing is this really broadening of tech that comes in And we say we deal with anything with a battery or a plug now. And think about that for a moment, just how much more has a battery or a plug. Like it's such a broader range of tech that's become
Yeah.
smart over the years and will continue to become smart.
Yeah.
On the flip side, it can be a challenge for recycling. Last week I was at a battery recycling summit, and batteries, when they get into shredders for electronic shredding, they're a problem because they can cause fires. This is a real challenge. But the problem is you don't always know when a product has a battery in it. So we're looking at ways to identify batteries, a movement of digital watermarking that's coming forward, and just coming up with strategies in terms of awareness and also processes on the recycling side so that we can recover more batteries. And battery recycling rates are very low. It's usually 5 to 10%, and we want to get up to 90% by 2030 by some estimates. So that's a real focus now around technology because so much more has a battery.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. When we've talked about the Internet of Things for years, and now we're coming to the end of that generation of products. When you look at the adoption of the cloud for computing, those existing legacy mainframe computing equipment and hardware and racks and services, that's all now up for recycling, right? That's the reason why people, big companies, are moving to the cloud to alleviate the stress on having to upgrade their hardware and it be more flexible. I guess, and you know this better than anyone, we're at a sort of peak recyclable opportunity, right? And it's going to get bigger. If we were to move towards a peak, where would you say we were right now as far as recyclability of anything?
That's a great question. I will say, I don't know exactly where the peak is, but we've passed the peak in terms of the makeup of technology that makes it easy to recycle, I'd say. There's been a movement over the years, as you've pointed out before, about making things smaller. And in the recycling space, we call that lightweighting, because the volume of material may be growing, but as things get smaller and lighter, it actually makes the recycling value of them that much smaller. So it's almost like two-faced situation where, yeah, the volume is growing, but it's harder to recycle. And also, unless products are designed so that they are recyclable at the end of their life, which traditionally products have not been, it can be really difficult to recycle many products. As an example, a printer that, by virtue of how they put the screws in some printers, means that it becomes incredibly difficult to dismantle it. And getting toner and ink into a shredder is also a fire hazard. It's also a big problem. So we haven't been traditionally thinking about designing products for recycling, but it is a growing movement where there's standards now that say, talk to recyclers and design that into the products from the beginning so that we don't have these problems. The other thing that we're seeing at Quantum is a whole movement towards reuse. That side of the business has eclipsed the recycling business. When they acquired my company, they also acquired another company. Both of us were reuse-focused companies. And we're seeing now that if we can reuse a product, and ideally reuse the whole product first, and if not, then reuse parts, and we can calculate now the environmental benefit of reuse from an emission standpoint, we can see that depending on the type of product it is, that reuse helps to save anywhere from 7 to 21 times the emissions over even recycling. That much more emissions are saved or avoided simply because we're using a product, because we're not spending the energy manufacturing it. We're not pulling the materials from the earth and, the emissions intensity of that.
When the big hardware manufacturers are designing products now, they need to consider reuse and recyclability in that design process. And again, I don't want to go down the history lane of my career, but I went into the handset manufacturers after I left Nortel. And, I'd be working in China where they would be pumping out, 500,000 handsets a day. I mean, they would even say you knew what color Motorola's next product would be if you looked in the river in Tianjin, because the paint, that's I'm talking 2003, 2004 right now. One of the mantras that used to be used in the manufacturing and the design process was design for distribution. When you design that product, design it so that it can be distributed as efficiently as possible. The two things that you've said there that I think challenge that mantra is it's about design for recycling and reuse, right? That's a key thing that the hardware manufacturers should be thinking about in their product portfolios and their product design. There's an opportunity there for them to rethink how they build based on the design for recycling and reuse. I'm just wondering if there's any, if they're actively talking about this, or it's passed us by, it's happened and they're doing it.
Yeah, well, once a product is designed and put out into the market, it's too late.
No.
I would say that the manufacturers, they're at different stages of how seriously they take this. It's not, at this point anyways, it's not legislated, but I would say we're now starting to see, and last week was a great example, one of the main phone manufacturers at the battery recycling conference basically saying, recyclers, we want to work with you. Tell us what we need to do, help educate us. And those conversations before have been, I think, rather ad hoc versus there's now a real movement around this. One of the things that's actually sparking that movement is the new right to repair legislation that's now starting to crop up across the globe. So right to repair legislation basically says to manufacturers that you have to open up your tools and information and spare parts so that other people and consumers specifically can repair the products. Because
interesting.
Yeah, I'd hate to say it, but right now electronics are often single-use items, right? They break. You don't know what to do with it. Ideally, you recycle it. And there's studies that show that the majority of people, about 70%, actually do want to repair the product or have someone else repair it for them. But we just don't have the information and the tools. And so that's what this new right to repair legislation is doing. What's really interesting is that while it's somewhat designed for consumers to repair their own products, it's likely that that's going to be a really niche market that actually does that. I mean, I know personally that I'm not going to repair my own electronics. My husband might, but I would much rather send it to a local company that could do it for me. And that's the thing. What we're anticipating is that this right to repair legislation is going to, prime the supply chain, basically lift the awareness and the options to repair electronics across the board. So it's not just about this this niche application of it. So that's what we're hoping anyway.
Well, so what you're saying is the right to repair legislation enforces the manufacturers to open up, right, the recipe in their products or the bill of materials so that third parties, there's a business opportunity there, could come in, utilize that knowledge to provide that repair service. It's been happening, but at the very rudimentary level. So if your phone screen cracks, there's a guy you can call. He'll come to your house in a van, knock on the front door, you give him what needs repairing, he'll go back to his van and then come back 30 minutes later, charge you $50 and the screen is repaired. but that's like very rudimentary. Like if it's a screen or if something, fairly easily physical. But what this legislation does is let them go a little deeper, right? There could be a software glitch, or there could be a transceiver or a motherboard issue that third parties could get into, make that repair. But you can see the environmental benefits right there. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times something seemingly small has gone wrong with a piece of hardware in the house, and then it's ended up binned or in the recycling bin. Yeah.
And that is totally normal. And the other thing that this legislation does is, with cell phones, I would say there has been like an industry around the repair of it. It makes sense, to repair your screen. But for like other types of electronics, like my husband's coffee cup, when that breaks, under this new legislation, it's all the other products as well.
All the other stuff, yeah.
There'll be now options for. Traditionally, the manufacturers haven't been so keen on this type of legislation because it really challenges them in terms of their intellectual property. If they have to open up, proprietary information about their business. Also, safety concerns around particular products, and that's a really legitimate concern. What we're starting to see is these manufacturers opening up business units that are services for this, right? They're seeing the business opportunity in this now as well.
It extends the life cycle of the product, right? You always used to look at product life cycles, and even with mobile devices, you would upgrade every 2 years your device. Now it's gone to 3 years, and now they're predicting it can go even further because the device has more longevity against any hardware fault. And when we talk about new technologies, not a day goes by. In fact, I started the conversation talking about it because it's kind of a big thing for us right now is generative AI. How do you see that playing a role in quantum and in ESG as a whole? Do you think it's going to be a force for good, a positive?
Well, at Quantum, we hired our first employee who is specifically focused on AI. How do we leverage AI as a company in our processes? At Quantum, we have a green team, which is basically representatives from across the company. We work on tackling environmental issues. And we put a survey out to the company on, what are we doing well, and things like how do you commute to work, and suggestions, that kind of thing. It's a bunch of data that comes back. He worked with me to basically leverage ChatGPT to analyze our survey results and to help us to see some of the patterns that we couldn't easily see without like really spending a lot of time on the data. And, one thing that surprised me, we have at Quantum our production workforce, which is the folks that are in the recycling plants. And we also have our, office or salaried staff who are much more connected via email and whatnot. And there's some like distinct differences between those two groups of employees and how we commute to work and our openness to commuting, for example. The production workforce is far more open to trying a carpooling program than our office staff, believe it or not. They live closer to our facilities than our other staff do. So it's just really interesting how it was able to make some of those connections that like we couldn't easily do. But I do think that AI can play a big role in terms of ESG. I mean, one of the things that we're now doing is, as I've talked about the importance of reuse, is applying a digital like grading system for reuse that's accessed virtually. So basically, as products is removed from a customer's warehouse or their network, we can assess it at that point in terms of its potential reuse. Because the earlier that we can assess reusable material and segregate it, the better the outcomes are. Leveraging those AI tools now, there's so much more that we can do. I also think on the emissions side of ESG, the E, that AI can play a bigger and bigger role in terms of understanding our emissions, even the application of smart thermostats and like that data collection and analyzing in terms of how we heat our facilities. And like that's something where technology has already proven it can help us to, do better and be more smart about our natural gas usage and our electricity usage. But I think we're going to see a lot more of that as these like AI-driven technologies can help us to connect dots that we haven't been able to connect so far. Also, on the safety side, which maybe that's more of the S of ESG, we have struggled with battery recycling. As I mentioned, they can cause fires. And so we're looking at deploying some new technology which leverages X-ray technology, which leverages machine learning and AI to be able to pinpoint where batteries are so that they can be removed prior to entering the shredder. So like a much more sophisticated way of battery identification that doesn't rely on just the human eye. Like we're starting to see possibilities. And I think if we were to have this conversation even in 2 years' time, we would see and realize opportunities that we may not even know like exist today.
There's, again, looking at the news, and I don't want to get into politics, things like net zero and everything. And we talk about the ever-increasing need, desire, opportunity to recycle and reuse. How do you think we're doing? Where do you think we are? And what else do you think needs to happen in order for... What would be your summary and your vision on this? Just interested to get that perspective, Stephanie.
Matt, when I think about the broader issue of climate change and where we are and where we need to be, frankly, we're doing, well, I don't think I could use the word on your podcast. We're not doing very well. And there was just a recent report that came out that says that while we know we need to keep warming to 1.5 degrees and keeping warming to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels is somewhat acceptable, we're at 2.9. The people that released the report through the UN basically said, we don't know what else to say. Like, we keep delivering, it's like bad news, and like we feel like a broken record. I get it. And I'm really worried, especially as a mother, what the future entails and all the sort of spin-off effects. So we definitely need to do more very quickly. That being said, I am hopeful. I am hopeful that we will get our stuff together enough to make some necessary changes, because when I think back, who knew what ESG even stood for 5 years ago? We didn't. Like net zero, that was not really common language even, 3 years ago. The change in the pace of knowledge and awareness in this space and acceptance now, because we see, from a weather perspective, some of these extreme weather events that they've predicted are now happening with a regular occurrence. There's been a lot that's changed. And as you pointed out, even a year ago, I mean, who knew what ChatGPT was? And now it's just a part of our everyday language. So I am hopeful because we know also that we do have the technologies and we do have the answers to make it happen. We just need to make it happen. We just need to have the will to make the choices that align with that. And some of those choices might be hard. On the recycling and the reuse front, I'm really encouraged because I see, large organizations wanting to make a difference and like doing the things to make a difference. I see now, for example, that these large organizations are now looking at their whole reuse and recycling as a sustainable investment. It used to be that it was very much, siloed, if you will, and, we'll focus on getting the biggest recovery from these products because, for the biggest financial return and, just like landfill, all that other stuff. And like, we don't really care in a sense. But now they're looking at it from a broad perspective of like, help us to do the right thing. And we understand that we'll, make some money over here. It'll cost us money over here. We need to look at this from a big picture perspective. And that is happening. And I'm now pulled regularly into these meetings with these large organizations around ESG, also partially because like they're demanding it. They want to have these conversations.
And I don't want to get philosophical, but you made me think of something there. And it relates to, you mentioned it yourself, we think about our children. And it was the great poet Whitney Houston who once said, "I believe the future is our children." But do you think our children have a better propensity, perception, willingness to take this challenge on than our demographic? Because when I look at it technically, when we look at sort of the digital experience, one of the things we say is the future demographic cohorts, the Gen Zs of the world, have a higher expectation for the experience they get from their technology and the digital experience. Do you think that same demographic has a higher understanding, willingness to do more, to do the more that we talked about right at the beginning of your answer there?
Well, I think in many ways, the young generations will have no choice but to deal with it. It's about, embracing the challenge because this is the reality. This is the key issue their generation will face. And the thing that, keeps me up at night is my daughter ever turning to me and saying, like, "Mom, why didn't you do more?" Like, I would hate for that to happen. Makes me even emotional thinking about it. Some of these elements, these issues that perhaps they learn in school, but I think it's also somewhat like through like social circles of like, in this case, I think Tesla, it's good for the environment and it's
cool.
Probably cool, right?
Yeah.
I do think that the young generation has that. They're more instilled with this, and I think they're more instilled with values around being environmentally responsible. And we see that in the data from where the youth choose to work.
Stephanie, obviously you're extremely passionate about this topic, and as such you started your podcast. So tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast, because that's how we connected, and it's always great to meet a fellow podcaster and hear about their show and everything they're doing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we started The Circular Future back in January. And really, the reason why we started it is because we were getting questions around specifically carbon credits. Like, what are carbon credits and why do some companies offer them when others won't? And how does this all work? And at the time, we thought what we really need to have is conversations. We want to sit down and talk about this, because if we write, blog about it, it just won't have the same effect and same level of understanding as conversations. So that's when we decided to start The Circular Future, to tackle some of these questions around how do I do the right thing, especially as a company? How do I arm myself with the right knowledge and the right resources? So we created The Circular Future to do just that. So it's all about access to experts and to innovations and tools out there to help individuals be sustainability champions in their business, especially if they are not a sustainability professional. Because the ESG people like me, we might already get it, but there's increasingly every type of business professional, whether you're in finance or operations or procurement, what have you, that these folks are now being tasked with sustainability related initiatives, and they have questions. And so that's why we started the podcast. And I'm really excited. We got renewed for season 2.
Do you enjoy it as well? I can see you got a big smile on your face when you talk about it. You definitely enjoy it.
You know, I do enjoy it because for me, podcasting is something I had never done before. So it forces me to get outside of my comfort zone. And so I feel like I have learned so much about podcasting and just about myself and like putting myself out there, like doing, you know, a live podcast recording in front of 200 people freaks me out, but it's so good for me to do that.
Well, do something each day that scares you, right? Isn't
there
that
you go.
What, I can't remember who said that. It wasn't Whitney Houston. Well, best of luck with that, Stephanie. Now, we're almost coming to the end of our time, and the way we finish the TGI is with our quick fire TGI to go round. So I'm going to give you 2 options, 2 multiple choice, and then you're going to give me your preference. And it just helps our listeners understand a little bit more about you and lets us finish with a bit of fun. So are you ready for TGI to go?
I love it. I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. TGI to go. Question number 1. Singing or dancing?
Oh, dancing.
Yeah?
I danced when I was young, and I was even on Electric Circus once, which, given this is a Canadian show, or Canadian, episode, Canadian listeners may remember that show. It was on Much Music. It was like the Friday night dance party, and I was on it. That would have been in 2000, I think, somewhere in there. And so, maybe I have it on VHS. I don't know.
Question number 2: poutine or schnitzel?
I would say poutine because I'm vegetarian. So the schnitzel would be out. Even though I did live in Germany for a year and a half total over various periods. And at the time, I ended up being fluent in German.
And whereabouts in Germany were you?
Most of my time was spent in Freiburg and Breisgau in the Black Forest, the southwest corner. But yeah, I love Germany and I love Austria and I'd love to say schnitzel, but I can't.
Biking or yoga?
Yoga.
Yeah.
I do yoga every weekday morning. I have a little routine. I don't know what it is about biking. I know some people love biking, but I just never, it's just not my thing. I enjoy running or jogging, but not so much biking.
Yeah. It's interesting that I did yoga for the first time in September in Israel. I was kind of dragged into it as part of a corporate thing, and it was a revelation. And we also had the Yoga Fit creator and author on the show in season 3, I think. So you should check that out. But she was telling me about the benefits of yoga, and I was like, yeah. And then, like I said, I did it for the first time in Israel, and I was like, oh my gosh, I should do more of this.
You should do more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many levels, right? Like the flexibility and, but also the mental side of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, question number 4. Vancouver or Vienna?
Vienna.
Yeah.
Vienna is my favorite European city. So much history. It's beautiful. It's got a really great vibe. I love Vienna.
You know when they always do the top 10 cities to live in the world, right? The only European ones that make it into the top 10 are Vienna and Copenhagen. And I think Vienna has been number 1 the last couple of years because the Canadian cities like Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto are always in there, along with Melbourne and Sydney from Australia. But Vienna there's something unique and different. I love Vienna. It's spectacular.
Magical. Yeah.
Did you ever go to the opera in Vienna?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did. And I have kind of a funny story about that. Just that I went when I was in university. I did a year in Freiburg.
Yeah.
my third year of university. And we went, some friends and I went to Oktoberfest, and then we went to Vienna. We were backpacking, and we had heard that you could get last minute sell-off tickets at the Vienna Opera House. So we showed up. Turns out we got tickets. We go inside. Well, wouldn't you know, we get like box seat tickets. And here we are in our, jeans and our backpacking look, sitting beside,
And everyone's wearing
ball
tuxedos.
gowns.
Everyone's wearing tuxedos in the Vienna Opera House, yeah. Or
And
ball
we were
gowns,
getting
yeah.
looks, and I totally appreciate it. But we're like, we just got ourselves into the Vienna Opera House for like
Mhm.
10 euros or something
Yeah.
ridiculously low.
Nice.
So we're like,
And I proposed to my wife in Salzburg. So I have a big Austrian love for things. So that's good to
I
hear.
love Salzburg too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you were going to have a weekend somewhere or a day out, would you go to Canada's Wonderland or Niagara Falls?
I'd say Canada's Wonderland.
Yeah?
Why? Because, I live an hour away from Niagara Falls, and I've been many times.
Yeah.
Whereas Canada's Wonderland, apart from going quite a bit when I was in my teens, I love a good roller coaster now and again. And I have not been very often, so...
Another sort of day out, would you go to Muskoka or Ottawa?
That's a good question. I'm going to say Ottawa. And part of the reason is we have a family cottage north of Muskoka. So for me, Muskoka is our cottage country, and I experienced that, but in our own, it's on the French River, further north. Whereas Ottawa, I haven't really been a tourist in Ottawa in a long time.
And one more question to close out today's TGI. Based on a hardware vendors, actually, Samsung or Apple?
I would say, that's a really tough one for me. I was going to say Samsung because I was an Android girl all my life, with the exception of having an iPad. However, since I joined Quantum is an Apple company, and therefore I made the leap to an Apple iPhone last year. And what I love about Apple is the integration between all the devices.
All
That's
right.
pretty cool. But apart
So
from that, I'm still Android.
Oh, you're still Android apart from that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if I have to choose one, I would choose,
Yeah. All right. So thank you very much, Stephanie, for today. I've really enjoyed the hours flown by. It's been a great conversation. Before we sign off for the day, is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners?
No, just thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to having Edith on our podcast as well.
What a great episode. Wow. Really great. Really enjoyed that. Stephanie is an absolute delight, and the conversation was fascinating. So check out her podcast, The Circular Future. It's out there right now. She's in her second season. She's loving it, and I'm sure you will too. Now, please subscribe to our podcast on all the usual podcast channels. Actually, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts and enjoyed the show, please rate and review. Also, visit our website, amdocs.com/The Great Indoors for everything that's ever happened, ever, on TGI. Now, we'll be back next week as the season rolls on. I'm Matt Roberts for Amdocs in Toronto. Have a great day wherever you are.